Hey everyone, this is Anne. We're having such a great time making this podcast, and we want to keep making it. Right now, we have enough subscriptions to pay Melody through early March. Listener support is our primary way of funding this project, and we may get around to experimenting with ads, but for now, we depend on you. If you're able to pitch in $5 a month, it goes a really long way in making this show sustainable. Remember that if you're already a paid subscriber to the Culture Study newsletter, you get a discount on the podcast subscription. If you can't figure out how to make that work, just email me, get in touch. And if there's someone you know who'd like a subscription but can't swing it in their budget, you can also gift them one. Head to culturestudypod.substack.com to see how you can support the show. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm starting recording. Do you have the towels?
I have the towels, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we should set the scene that it's about 40 degrees and raining.
No, it's like
45.
50.
No, it's colder now.
It said 50 on my thing. 45. Okay. It's raining. We're coming down to the beach. We're meeting our friends,
Hey,
Beth and Joe.
You're recording this for a podcast.
Yeah.
Keep the language clean.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay, Charlie, do you have our towels out?
I have a
Not out.
timer. What are we shooting for?
I don't know.
2, 3 minutes?
Oh, I'm going to do...
6 minutes?
No, I'm going to do 2.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm going to do 2.
3.
Okay.
I think you'll get used to it after 2 and a
No,
half.
but that's
what
all
I
I
I'll
need.
set it for 3, and then I'll give a shout out at 2,
Your
unless I'm
bones
evil
will tell you when
when it's
it's
done.
time.
I've been doing cold showers. This is vastly different. Are
Okay!
you gonna hold that in your hand?
Yes!
Oh. We're waiting.
Ready?
Joe,
Usually I'm going from like a warm space.
I know, it's a little harder when you're not. Oh, God.
No one. Let's go! Come on! Let's go!
Okay, all right. Okay, Christ, on the ground.
Breathe!
It's not so bad.
Breathe!
This sounds demented.
You hate this the most.
It's so cold. Get your shoulders under a little.
I can't.
Moving helps and it hurts.
Yeah, it hurts more, I think.
If you go out now, you're at 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
That's good.
I definitely
Okay, I'm good.
You did it. You did 2.5.
Oh my God. Christ on the cross.
The whole ocean. I do feel very alive.
I know, I do too. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
And I'm Charlie Warzel. I'm a staff writer for The Atlantic and Cold Plunge enthusiast.
You're my partner. You live in the same house as me.
Hello.
And you are a person who has encouraged me to cold plunge several times in the past. You are a person who has looked at cold plunge, like devices that go in your backyard online, seriously. Even though we live on the ocean, cold ocean.
Yes, that's all correct. I am a little more, I would call myself a little more than cold plunge curious is probably how I would frame it, right?
Yeah.
I've looked at the literature. I've done the browsing. I'm ashamed to say that I've hovered my mouse over the more info button on like a $6,500 ceramic filtered cold plunge tub that we can't afford and should never have in our backyard, especially because we have access, as you said, to abundant cold water in the form of an ocean. So yes, I've been sort of had a little bit, I think. Part of why I am happy to come and talk about this is because I can both look at it from the standpoint of the internet, which is the thing that I write about a lot, and the sort of the personalities and the influencer style of that, but also as a mark. I am straight up, I've been targeted by the Instagram ads, by the podcasts, the wellness sort of industrial complex, and I feel its presence, and I feel working on me.
How would you rate my cold plunge? that we did this past week?
Well, you didn't get in because you had to hold the phone to get the audio all the way. And
I was up to my shoulders.
I know that's a tactical mistake though, because what you want is you want to get up to sort of like the neck, not just because it's like the hardcore thing to do, but also like it's helpful. Like you don't want the wind to cut across and like expose some of that flesh. Like it's almost like warmer in the water. Plus, after a little bit, it like numbs those senses so that like, you're actually sort of like you're feeling more and less at the same time. But I think something I really like admire about you in general is you don't want to like suffer unduly. And something that I need to work on myself is that like I sometimes equate suffering with like just like good. So when you get out, sometimes I'm like, she should sit in for another minute. But also, maybe you just know you don't want to be uncomfortable, and that's admirable.
I mean, you could hear in the audio, there's places where we're like, I can't feel my fingers.
Yeah, that was
and I know that the numbness is like part of it, like that's part of the process. But I also like, I think for me personally, understanding that limit of like, okay, I'm underwater, I'm breathing through like the discomfort, and there's a line between discomfort and like torturing myself. That's an interesting line.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I think that's really undefined just in general in the cold plunging community, right? Or like in like the stuff about it. Like it's interesting to know where the discomfort moves into just becoming a virtue for virtue's sake, or if there's actually like a certain amount of benefits at a certain thing. Like, there is like any sort of hobby or any kind of culture, different benchmarks, right? And like people like lowering the floor, like, can I get into, like 30, can I break 40, right? In my degrees, right? And so like the plunge we did together there that's on tape is the coldest that I've ever felt in one, right? It was like a 45-degree day. It was raining. The water was about 45 degrees at the time, which is really cold. Like it's really actually quite chilly. And so like there's a point there where like you actually don't want to stay in too long. Like that's like where hypothermia comes in. Like you don't want to be hypothermic. That's not like helpful. No medical professional would want you to be that way.
So I would rate my plunge a success because I stayed in for 2 minutes and like 20 seconds and then also got out. So that to me,
that is success. No, and
next time I'll go to my shoulders. It's totally fine. We have so many questions and they're all like kind of in the same vibe. Like they're all basically like, why bros? Is this real? But I think the first one is just a basic why. This is from Erin.
My question is about cold plunging, specifically why? Just why? I know the supposed reasons, brown fat, increased cold tolerance, a buzz akin to runner's high, but is any of that real or is it just bro-y pseudoscientific biohacking that's been rebranded as wellness? Why do people actually do this, like this, make a ritual out of risking hypothermia and cardiac damage?
Okay, Charlie, will you outline for me the way that you have in several conversations in the past, the supposed benefits of cold plunging?
Yes. I think, first of all, I feel so weird like listing this out because it almost makes me like complicit in it. Like, and I gotta say, like, full honesty, like I legitimately don't know if this is just snake oil or not. And that's part of the interesting thing. Like I legitimately couldn't tell you. Every time I read something about it, I feel like if I read it from like a cold plunge website or people who are into it, they're like very adamant about the benefits. And then you read scientists and doctors talk about it and they're like, I don't know, there was a study that they did in like, lab rats and it doesn't translate to humans, or the study was like 8 people and that was in 2014 and like we don't know now. And then like I read something on like I believe it was like the American Heart Association that's just like, no, don't, like, stop, you're not a polar bear, like do not do this. Or like, don't do it too cold and too fast
aggressively.
Anyway, the benefits as they are outlined by all the different people that the questioner laid out there, the most obvious one is like anti-inflammatory benefits, right? And that is like, that can go as surface level as like after working out, it gives you a chance to sort of like, I mean, you see athletes all the time taking like ice baths, or like pitchers in baseball, like the classic ones, just like dunking their, elbows in there to reduce inflammation. I think that's pretty like standard. I don't think there's anything like crazy.
Like
about
no
that.
one's like, we should stop icing.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Icing.
It's
it
more
works.
like,
and if you,
we should ice our whole bodies kind of thing.
Yeah, if you dunk your whole body in there, like I honestly, like I'm dealing with like a little bit of like a runner's injury, and like it feels better, right? Just like it feels better when you go in a hot tub, like doing that hot and cold, that has benefits. There's this idea of like how it works on brown fat. Again, I'm not like a doctor or a scientist. I mean, good question. This is one of those things I just say, and I just sort of hope that no one like you calls me out on it. It's adipose tissue, according to the Cleveland Clinic, that regulates your body temperature in cold conditions. So it activates before you start to shiver. Brown fat burns calories and stores
like blubber?
energy. I mean, I think
that's the way I'm going to think of it.
Let's just
blubber,
do
even
that.
if that's not precise.
People are going to probably get mad at me online for
they can get mad at me. I'm the one
fair.
who's approximating
I'm used to it too,
blubber.
right? Let's go nuts. Anyway, there's an idea that this activation's like really good because there's not a lot of things in the world that activate that. And there's a sort of like a caloric element to this that
it's like diet culture.
I think
right?
It's been pretty debunked though. Like that the sort of the activation of that brown fat burns like 2 or 3 more calories per minute or whatever than you normally would. It's like, it's really, unless you're in the tub for like, hours on end, you're not going to see like really any noticeable difference. There are sort of, there are thoughts that, putting just like running or something like that putting some cardiovascular strain on your body is just naturally good to do. Then there's the sort of like the inflammation on a larger scale, right? There are people who have said, I struggle sort of like chronically with like back issues or like gut inflammation or blah, 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 like these sort of larger sort of inflammation issues that are sort of chronic.
Inflammation is such like someone suggested that we do an episode just about inflammation as like a buzzword in wellness, because somehow like there's all these foods and supplements and cold plunging that you can do to cure it, because apparently like we are just inflamed beings.
It's everywhere, right? Like they're just like, I get those Instagram ads all the time where it's just like some guy who just like, unbeknownst to me, just like rips his shirt up, and all of a sudden you just see like this distended belly, and they're like, you have got gut inflammation from eating unnatural processed foods, like you need AG1 green powder or whatever, right? So there's definitely like an obsession with that, and it is sort of in that realm, right? Of like clearly there's like, this is a real thing. There are problems for people, but like it can also sort of be used as like this all-encompassing bubble of like medical diagnosis. Anyway, there's people who say that like long-term this really has benefits, right? So all those are very contested by the science. Like it's not that like there isn't something there, but it's like there's not really science that is like proving that, or there's small base studies, but a lot of it is like it is still like TBD, I think is the way to say it, right? Or like undetermined at this moment. And then I think that there's these other ones which I actually like. These are the ones I subscribe to, right? Which is that it activates a lot of endorphins, right? To get in there. Like you get like a severe dopamine hit. Some people say, I've seen the comparison is like 25x what the level of dopamine released when you do like cocaine or something like that. So it's this idea that like, it sort of makes you feel all these different extreme feelings. And there's something that is really addictive and both like lovely about that. And I would say every single time, like that's the one thing that is true to me as someone who's done it. Every single time I get out of there, I am like, I am alive, right? And there's like that's like a nice thing. And then the other one that I would say is really intriguing to me is that the culture around this says that doing an ice bath either every day or 3 times a day or whatever, just establishing like a regular cadence with it, is doing something hard. Nobody wants to get into that body of water, however big it is, whatever it is, the tub, like your body fights that, right? It activates that fight or flight sense in you. You shiver, you scream, you do all that stuff, and your body knows that once you've done it a few times, right? Like your hand trembles in the shower if you turn it all the way down, right? Like it's telling you, don't do this. This is going to be a bad thing. And some of these evangelists suggest that doing it all the time builds up a sort of resilience inside you, right? Like for other things. If you are used to doing this, if you can just kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this, that it is sort of a tactic for building resilience that can show up in other parts of your life. And whether that's true or not, I don't really know. But I also find it like, as a human in 2024, preparing myself to do things, like if that's something I can build, I don't think that's a terrible thing.
A lot of that, at least the last stuff, that's stuff that you hear all the time in the distance running community or in any sort of like endurance sport, that it's hard, but then when you're done, you feel good. I agree that when I get out of a cold plunge, I feel good. Like, that's so weird to describe. You feel freezing. You feel like sopping. Like we have to use our sneakers to go in because it's really slippery and rocky, but it still feels good. And it especially feels good if you can get into a hot tub or a hot shower afterwards. And that's the same feeling that I get after I do like a long, hard run. And also that's something that, like, when you're on mile 20 in a marathon, part of the work that you have put in order to train to get there is by pushing through other points where you said, like, I'd rather not, right? Like, I'd rather not go on this run. I'd rather not run this extra mile. And I think this is, again, where stuff gets contentious, because there's a difference between, say, running through extreme pain in order to finish and to achieve a goal, and running just when, like, you'd rather lay on your bed. Like, I think that sometimes those two things get confused, the same way that they could get confused when it comes to cold plunging.
Yeah, I've tried to think about how it makes me feel sometimes, and one of the things, it's similar almost in a way to like making your bed every day right when you get up.
Yeah.
If you make your bed, you've done a thing, right? Like, they can't take that away from me. Like, I'm starting the day off right. And then, like,
who makes the bed in our house?
I do.
I know.
Because I'm the only one who can, quote unquote, do it right. Yeah, okay. The most capable person I know can't make the bed. Like, I'm not buying it.
I can't do it the way you can do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I see it sort of like similarly. Like, on a day when I manage to walk my ass into the ocean and sit in it for a few seconds, like, that's a win. That's something like you kind of can't take away. Like, we often say in our household, like, after doing some exercise we didn't want to do or something, like, we did the hard thing. And like, that's a hard thing that you can just chalk off the list. And there's something great about that. I mean, obviously it feeds into the style of like, you must be productive every day. You must do so, like, but I also genuinely think that, like, it's not a bad thing to feel pride in a hobby, right? It's like almost the exact opposite of like the way that I feel after like scrolling TikTok, right? Which is like a thing that like my body tells me I want to do, and then I feel like garbage after doing it. This is like a thing my body tells me I do not want to do, that I feel like God after, It's just crazy.
Okay, the next question is about how it became a trend. Let's hear from Alyssa, who's a paid subscriber, so this excellent question was at the top of our list.
How did cold plunging go from a fringy activity embraced by Wim Hof and his followers, and something that extreme endurance athletes use for post-race recovery, to something so mainstream? And how did we take something so basic with such minimal barriers to entry and make it something that boutique studios charge upwards of $40 for?
Okay, so first, I don't know who Wim Hof is. Do you?
Yes. Wim Hof is a Dutch man who's kind of become like a motivational speakery type fellow. And he is known for doing kind of extreme things at cold temperatures. Like, he climbs mountains barefoot or without a shirt on. He plunges in like the Arctic. he holds the world record for a barefoot half marathon on ice and snow. And he is sort of like the person who is most associated with cold plunging, but like from way, way back, before it became a fad. But he created this.
I mean, that's the thing, is that like the polar bear plunge has been like, as far as I can remember, everywhere.
Yes.
Like in my hometown, like in, big cities, people doing it on Coney Island. It's also like a total, like it's just a big practice. Lots of places where there are oceans and lakes. Like this is something that has a long, 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 long history. And we know that. I think most people know that.
Yes. Well, the Coney Island Polar Bear Club is quite old, from either the late 1800s or 1903, I think, was the first one. It was led by this guy who was sort of like the 1903 version of like Huberman, or like, an influencer like that, who sort of had some, maybe even like a Joe Rogan type. And he was also the inventor of a penis pump for male enhancement. And it was,
this all
and it was
fits
called the
together,
penis scope.
right?
Yes.
This fits together because, you mentioned Huberman. I think many listeners know who Huberman is, but that's really key to the popularization, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean,
So who is Huberman?
So
Tell us who
Andrew
that is.
Huberman is I believe he's a neuroscientist at Stanford, and ran a lab at Stanford for a while, still I think does. And he does a lot of like neuroscience experiments with like the effects of, daylight and circadian rhythms and, stuff that sort of ties into like optimization culture. And he's
the one who told you to tell me that like when we travel internationally, that the first thing we should do is like go stare at the sun.
Yeah, he's big into it's not even internationally every day. You're supposed to like wake up and the first thing you do is you're supposed to stare direct, like don't focus your retinas on the sun, but stare like as close sort of to it for like at least 5 minutes in direct sunlight to like wake your body up. He's got a lot of stuff like that. It's interesting.
So he has a very popular podcast.
In 2020, he started going on podcasts. I think he went on Rogan's. He went on some of these other, like Tim Ferriss, these sort of self-helpy people, Rogan obviously branches into other things, but popular podcasts. And was such a popular guest, he started his own. And the Andrew Huberman podcast is essentially anywhere between like 90 minutes and 3 hours of him in a dark room just reading off stuff about studies. Like it's like a science lecture, it's a neuroscience lecture, like 2/3 of the time. Other times he interviews a guest. But it is ridiculously popular. It's like the 5th most popular podcast in the land, which is all just to say that this guy's like, for better or worse, he's just very influential. And he is a plunge advocate.
And, I think this is like a larger conversation in some ways, but I think that like the popularity of his thinking and like biohacking more generally, just this idea that you can optimize your body in all these different ways through attention to science and through attention to scientific studies and like be your best self. Why do you think it's so popular now?
I spoke to, this summer, I was reporting around for this, and I spoke to the founder of Plunge, which is like the highest end tub, right? They're like the $6,000 ones. And he's obviously really into this stuff. But I was asking him, like, why do you think this is a thing now, right? Like, obviously, the benefits aside or whatever, like, why is this a thing? And he said that, like, COVID was a real, like, jump starter for this in a lot of complex ways, right? Ways that some people, some of your listeners might agree with, and others that maybe like they won't. But what he said is basically like COVID did two things, right? It revealed a importance on being healthy. A lot of people picked up habits during COVID that were unhealthy, whether it was, coping through drinking or what have you, or it was just kind of like a shock to normal systems of like people spend a long time without going out to bars or things like that. And that there was an idea of focus on health and also change. And then there's sort of a reactionary element to all that, which is like a reaction against public health, right? And this idea of like, again, it gets all messy, but there's people who are sort of like trying to take their health into their own hands, right? Because they don't trust what other people are saying about it. So there's two branches of this tree, two different camps. But one of the big things that he was kind of pushing, and that a lot of people in this are pushing, is that there is broadly, culturally, different understandings and influences on health. And so, like, there are lots of plunge clubs. There's, like, lots of, like, sort of, like, little plungy, like, festivals that people can go to where it's like, this is a way to hang out. This is a thing to do. And, like, we don't necessarily subscribe to that, right? But, like, when we went plunging on the audio there, like, we went with our friends. Like, it is, like, a social thing you can do. And there's, like, an excitement about it, and it makes you feel really good and chatty. So I do think that there is this, like, this is tied up in a lot of complex things, especially like the internet part of it, right? And like the social influencers and all that. But I think there is also, broadly speaking, new ways of socialization and new norms around, like the traditional method of like going out to the bar and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think that there's like, on one end, there's people who are doing it because it feels kind of cool in your body when you do it. And also it's fun to do with other people. And it's a mechanism for social gathering. And we don't have a ton of those, right? So there's that end. And then on the other end, there's like people with the $6,000 tubs or paying for entrance into places where they can do these plunges, right? Who authentically think of themselves as like better than other people because they do these plunges, right? Because this is part of how they have become a superior person or like an optimized person. So that's just my polls that I'm setting up here.
Yeah. Part of the question that led into all this is, and like we talked about like Wim Hof for a second, his big thing is breathing exercises, like these really deep breathing things that like get you into whatever. And they're controversial too, because like people have passed out or like, like had seizures doing them because they're so serious, but they're supposed to like be kind of like transcendent, right? It's almost like having like a, like a spiritual experience, people talk about having on them. Again, not for me to say, but alongside the cold plunging is also this idea of like these deep breathing things, like, and there are facilities like the guy who cuts my hair is like really into, like, he's a sober person living this sort of like active optimization lifestyle.
He's like an aesthetic. Or that's not the word. He's
ascetic.
Like aesthetic.
Ascetic.
Like the word, like a monk. Like he like is very into like a simple, straightforward life like that.
And he always tells me about this place, and I don't know what it's called right now, but it's like essentially like a spa in San Diego where he goes like every couple of months, and it's all breathing, all hot and cold, so saunas and plunges and yoga, and then massage. And like the way that he describes it is like, it sounds like, oh man, like we all get in this room, we do these breathings and these chants, and then we plunge or whatever. And it's like, there's a way in which you can read that and go like, that's weird. Or that's, whatever. But it's also like, it's not totally different from like cold plunging is part of the normal spa experience, right? It's that idea of treating yourself. This is just more of like a sort of like, I guess, intense level of treating yourself in that way. So there's a luxury element to it for sure.
I would also say that situation does not sound dissimilar from some religious gatherings. And that's part of this too, when we're talking about like an opportunity for a social gathering that makes you feel something. That is oftentimes why people go to church. This question is another kind of bro-y question, but also it's about plunge etiquette. So I think this will be an interesting one for us. This comes from Megan.
I'm curious as to why or how bro culture has, quote unquote, taken over cold plunging. For context, I've been dipping all winter long in my nearby lake here in Vermont. And when I first started more than 4 years ago, it was just, if I saw anyone, it was small groups of women, usually middle-aged or older. It was a pretty quiet affair. I'd say just within the last year, pretty regularly, I've been seeing large groups of bros. By bros, I mean sort of like cut white dudes in their 20s. I was down there not too long ago at this popular spot, and over 15 guys just charged into the water yelling like some sort of raid while my friend and I were peacefully sitting in the water. For me, the practice is confidence building. It's about mindfulness. It's a way to be in nature and quiet my mind. It seems to have some other purpose for this group. I think there's plenty of room for all of us. I don't want to be exclusionary. I'm just curious as to what's causing this cultural shift.
First, I want to start with the fact that, like, obviously you heard us doing some whooping and charging in the audio for ours. But what is the etiquette around screaming? Because another person wrote in about being at a spa that had a cold plunging thing, but you weren't allowed to make noises when you got in because they were trying to like keep the peaceful environment at the spa. So that may be a little different, but like, what are the rules?
I've gotten into the cold plunge TikTok algorithm, unsurprisingly. You sort of show your bona fides by how like calm and cool you can keep it. You know, like there are these guys who are they're all like extremely chiseled, you know, like not like bodybuilders, but just like lean, sinewy dudes.
Zero body fat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't seem like douchebags, honestly. Like who knows, right? But like the way that they are doing it is more like they're just talking about like you know their practice and like I do this for 2 minutes every day before I go and like wake my kids up, whatever. Anyway.
Isn't there a guy that you showed me that like just films his plunge every day and he's like really popular?
Yeah, his name's Jordan something and he's on like day I mean as we record this, he's on like day like 379 of doing an ice bath every day. And he like every day he comes in the winter, he lives in Canada, he'll like find a different way to break the ice because he uses like a stock tub from like a farm's, you know, supply place. And it's just, you know, naturally frozen over. So he'll like break the tub and then he'll say, this is day whatever of me doing an ice bath every day. And he gets in it and he just, you know, all he's wearing is like a stocking cap and he just, you know, like makes quiet noises. He suppresses it. And then he does like a motivational quote. He's very popular. I think he's got over like 2 million followers on TikTok.
Why do people like watching that? Like, why do you like watching it?
Well, I don't know if I like it necessarily. I mean, it's interesting to see, like, I mean, I like the ritual, I'll say. Like, that's sort of why I was like hovering, you know, my cursor or my mouse button or whatever over the, you know, like, oh, what are the specs of this, you know, a backdoor tub? Because it's like the idea of like doing something every day. Like I like that. I like the idea of aspirational routine. So I think that there's something about that in there. I usually never watch the parts of the video where he does like the motivational thing where he's like, you know, like whatever. Anyway, there's like the bona fides, right? Like in terms of etiquette, where it's like, if you're one of those people who does it all the time, you know, it's like act like you've been there before, right? Like you get in and you just and that's it, and you keep it chill. And I also think it does get easier, like if you do it with frequency, your body's less shocked by it. I think that it's just like anything, right? It just depends on the environment you're in. Like if you're in a spa environment, right? Like yeah, I mean, it's probably best not to just like scream bloody murder, right? Or like have you and 5 of your friends like cannonball into like the cold plunge tub in the, you know, the place where everyone's like listening to Enya. Like that's just like not a chill thing to do. But if you're like in the ocean with your friends and, you know, you guys are just like trying to have a fun experience together, like I don't think that's a terrible thing. In the situation of like we have like a small cove, I personally, a conflict avoidant person, would go a little bit further away. But I also think like some of it is involuntary, right? Like your body's you're going to do what you're going to do if you're not used to that stuff. And if you're Anne Helen Peterson, you're going to scream at the top of your lungs and say, Christ on the cross.
I will say, that when I get in, if I'm by myself, I'm muttering, but I'm not like screaming, right? Because who are you screaming for? Like some of this is performative. And I think that what she's seeing is in some ways like these guys performing for one another, or like the same way that they would before, you know, as she points out, like running into battle. And And that probably that energy will dissipate, right?
Yeah, and I will say, like, as far as like groups of dudes doing things in a destructive way, like a bunch of them cold plunging in, a cove is like probably like the best thing you could ask a group of 20 something dudes to be doing. I'd much rather them be doing that than like 99% of other things that guys get together to do. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Go easy on the bros just there, and then, go hard on the bros everywhere,
everywhere
else.
Yeah. So this next question is about cold plunging in wellness and like wellness trends overall. So this is from Brianna.
I'm fascinated by the upticked interest in cold plunging. It's something that every algorithm seems insistent on me doing for wellness. And while I logically understand the supposed benefits, I just can't get into it. I've tried a cold shower routine before and it's miserable. What's the larger why behind the continued emergence of these wellness hacks? Does it always come back to trying to exert control over our lives when the universe is largely chaotic? Is it a replacement for spiritual practices that used to take place in religious communities? Is it tech bros seeing troubling economic trends and trying to optimize every part of their lives through individual behavior? Is it puritanical instincts wrapped in a new package to discourage us from ever doing anything that is comfortable and enjoyable? But maybe most importantly, why do we in modern society still believe that suffering is a requirement for self-improvement and self-actualization? Is it?
Wow, this person just like wrote the first paragraph to like any piece that you want to write in the future about cold plunging. You should thank them for that. That's like all of the guiding questions. It can guide an essay.
Yeah, my response to those questions was just going to be yes. Because like, wow, there's so much there. I mean,
some of these we've already addressed, right? We've talked about the religious component, the gathering component, and how that's feeding something. We've talked about the COVID component as well, and how that relates to like a general, both an individualization of health practices, like trying to figure out what works for me, but then also like trying to, I think I've seen a lot of this, like trying to make changes in oneself post-COVID because of the frailty of the human condition and all those sorts of things. I'm interested, we can start with at least, the whole like, everything is chaos, but we can control this. What do you think about that?
I think that's like dead on, right? I think that's a huge part of it. I also think it's like, again, like let's not undercount the endorphin boost and like the need that a lot of people have for that, right? Like it's just, that's why people turn to all sorts of awful, terrible things. Just when life's hard, when life feels chaotic, right? So that's a total thing. I wanted to like address though there's a nugget in that question that's just like I just can't get into it. Like, what's wrong with me? It's like, don't worry about that. But I think that like this is sort of the tough part about. I've been thinking a lot about this with just the internet in general. Is it forces you to see how so many people live, right? And like I think in a way that we were never supposed to. You're just like not supposed to be bombarded with like that much difference. And I don't mean like, diversity of thought or whatever. Like I just mean like there's a lot of people who live their lives in ways where you're like, pass. And you just like have to be subjected to it. And also like the way that the internet delivers that to you is like my different way of doing something, my, whatever is also virtuous in some way. That's like how it's often presented. There are plenty of people who live active, healthy lives and never touch an endurance sport ever, right? And then there's other people for whom endurance sports give them sort of like their reason to, to be and wake up in the morning, and like there's nothing better than riding the high of an ultra marathon or whatever it is, right? It's like there's just a lot of ways to be in the world, and I think that like the plunge phenomenon is I've seen it compared in places to the same kind of exercise or like wellness fads as like, jazzercising or like, using those like rubber bands that like, went around your waist or whatever. Like, I think that there's a bit of that is just this generation's like fad or way of being or way of feeling superior. And I just think that like you can live a happy, healthy life without ever jumping into a cold body of water.
And I think one of the reasons it feels like it's everywhere is because it's very Instagrammable, right? Like it is something that like is proof of life, like proof of getting outside, proof of doing something like weird and fun. And thus it travels in a way that all of the other parts of our day do not travel. But I also support you in the like, some people don't have to do it. Like it just, you don't have to feel like you should do it. Like it doesn't make you a better or a worse person. It does not make you more virtuous, which this kind of keys into the whole like Protestant suffering thing. Like suffering does not make you better necessarily.
And to be like internety about it, like the algorithms that dictate what we see on all sorts of platforms are driven by optimizing for engagement, and things that are extreme optimize engagement, whether it's extreme political thought, an extreme take, whatever. And this is sort of like especially given sort of the rise of Instagram Reels and TikTok and like sort of a visual internet, short form video internet. It is like a form of extremism, right? Like it's extreme content. And so therefore it plays really well. Like you asked me, why do I want to watch this Jordan dude get in the tub? And like, I don't have a good answer for you for that unless I'm thinking about it through the prism of like, I guess I kind of want to see like what his reaction is or what other people's reaction is. And like, if you do that once or twice, just because as a human, you're interested, like, oh, this person's plunging into a tub that's got ice floating on the top of it. Then TikTok picks up on that, or Instagram or whatever, and says like, oh, you want to see a lot of people cold plunging. And then you start seeing it everywhere. And then you see the ads, which are like brutal. Like the entire holiday season was just that company Plunge just like inundating me and being like, you want a $6,000 tub? Do you want a $6,000 tub? Would you like a $6,000 tub? It's like nuts.
Wait, it's 5% off. Would you like a
the Black Friday tub deal where it's still $5,500.
It's great.
It's lovely stuff.
Okay, for today's bonus segment, we're going to answer one more question about cold plunging, but also about how other people react to unique hobbies. And then we have advice time, and Charlie and I will answer a very pertinent question about pets.
Will our relationship survive?
If that piques your interest, head to culturestudypod.substack.com and become a paid subscriber to get full ad-free episodes and to support the show. Charlie, if people want to hear more from you on the internet, where can they find you?
Oh, gosh. The internet's broken. Buy a subscription to The Atlantic so we can eat. No. I'm legitimately trying to think of where to direct human beings.
No, they could, well, you have a lot of dog photos and like occasional plunge photos on your Instagram.
On Instagram, I'm at CWarzel. I'm at CWarzel on Threads. I'm at CWarzel on Blue Sky. I don't check Elon Musk's social network anymore, so don't find me there. And I write at The Atlantic every week. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Substack. If you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. Thank you so much for your support.